to thank the panelists who have decided to join us and accept our request to initiate or to guide the discussion in the trading services. So I would like actually to start by going through our ground rules. The first one is please mute your microphone and video when you are not speaking. And also please contribute to the meeting goals. Stay on point and on time. But also much of our discussion will focus on regional and continental perspective. Also focus on the topic we are discussing, and questions can be sent to the chat room where my colleagues will share them during the discussion. Also, meeting will be recorded for reporting purpose. And the last one is report of the meeting will be shared. So it is better also to give your address in the chat room. Regarding the program, I will start with welcome remarks, where we'll have a representative from GIZ, EABC Secretariat, CEO also will make the remarks. Then we'll go to the panel discussion, where we are starting with African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, where we are going to get the update on progress of negotiation of liberalization of trading services and FTA. After that, we'll go to a status of developing EAC schedule of commitment on trading service for EAC and Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Our panelist here will be Dori Kafir. Then we'll have another presentation from Professor Gerhard Erasmus from Trade Law Center, TRALAC, and we will talk about the basic features, flexibilities, and the regulatory concern. Then we'll have a question and answer. Thereafter, we'll have another presentation from Mr. Macon of TRAPCA here in Arusha, who will actually guide us on discussion regarding the EAC defensive and offensive interest and position under EAC shade of commitment on trading services. Then we'll have Dr. Ifogo, a regional coordinator, specialist of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, UNDP, who will talk about the perspective of the development partner as well as the private sector on the liberalization of services under Africa Continental. Then we will close our meeting by vote of thanks from our Executive Director, John Bosco Kalisa. So let's start with open remarks, and I welcome GIZ, German Development Partners representative. I think Mr. Marvin, you are around. You can make the remarks. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian, for this. Dear colleagues, esteemed guests, representatives from the EAC Secretariat, EABC, and other institutions that are joining us for this webinar, I would like to welcome you to the webinar on AfCFTA and trading services. On behalf of Mrs. Goja Bialut, the program manager GIZ, I just want to give a vote of thanks for you taking time to engage in this timely discussion. Obviously, the relevance of the AfCFTA cannot be overstated due to the potential and benefits and opportunities for the private sector as well as for the ESC citizens. So in this regard, we are happy and honored to be part of this process. The GIZ SIMPEC scope, as you might be aware, is centered around facilitating and advancing the regional agenda vis-a-vis economic and social integration. And we work closely with our partners, the ESC Secretariat, as well as EABC, to make sure that we make regional integration palatable for the ESC citizens. We work closely with the EABC because we recognize their positioning and their strategic importance in the region. And in the context of the AfCFTA, I think EABC is well placed with regard to translating the AfCFTA agreement into opportunities and benefits and making a private sector sense. And I hope that in today's discussion, when we are talking about trading services and the offers that ESC have made, that we can identify where the benefits and how the private sector services providers from tourism, from financial services, etc., can take advantage. So in this regard, I thank you once again for making time, and I extend the regards from the project manager, and I wish you a very happy and fruitful deliberation. Thank you. Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mabi, for the well-articulated remarks. Now I think we welcome our Executive Director, John Bosco Kalisa, actually to open our webinar. Karibu, Executive Director.
Asante sana, Adrian. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, first of all, take this opportunity to acknowledge the ESC representative, acknowledge the GIZ representative, the panelists, eminent panelists from all the RECs that are present that will be speaking, EABC members present, captains of industry present, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to, first of all, to thank all the participants for finding time amidst their busy schedule to participate in this important webinar dedicated on liberalization of trade in services by ESC partner states with African Union states. Your participation and engagement does demonstrate your commitment and quest for the ESC private sector development to actively participate in the negotiation of trade in service under African Continental Free Trade Area. I would like to thank the eminent panelists who have accepted our invitation, and I have always emphasized that the strengths of ESC economic growth and resilience is anchored on a strong foundation between the private sector and the public sector. That is being demonstrated here, where we have a number of government officials present, policymakers, the donors, the UN representative, that are going to share their insight, their views, how best can we liberalize the services? What are the opportunities envisaged under Continental Free Trade Area? Let me say that the CFTA is a game changer to our region, to our continent. It's a game changer in the sense that it provides opportunity to develop our industrial sector, to develop our agriculture sector, as well as to develop our service sector. We are looking at the market of around 1.3 billion population. We are looking at a GDP of around $3.4 trillion. We are looking at the welfare impact. World Bank did a study indicating that once this agreement is fully implemented, all the protocols that were implemented, we would be able to lift 100 million people out of poverty, both abject poverty as well as moderate poverty. So today focus is on the protocol on trading services, which is among the 3 protocols that were negotiated and concluded under phase 1 in March 2018. The other 2 protocols are the protocol on trading in goods and the protocol on rules and procedure on settlement of dispute. So the conclusion of negotiation culminated in the signing of the CFTA agreement, which entered into force in May 2019. At the time of signing the agreement, a number of instruments were outstanding and thus brought forward to phase 2 negotiation. So the objective of this protocol on trade and service is the creation of a single market for services through the removal of trade barriers among African partner states, what we call state parties. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say that the service sector is one of the key sectors in our region and the continent. When you look at the statistics, the contribution of service sector is around 50% of the total GDP across the continent. That underlines or underscores the importance of the service sector. However, while it is a very important sector in our economy, there are a lot of restrictions that inhibit the exploitation or the development of service trade. I appreciate that under EAC, the Common Market Protocol has been on the right track, but we still also see a number of restrictions that impede the free movement of services across our region. Let me state that the African Union member states have agreed on 5 priority services that we need to start liberalizing. These include financial services, communication, transport, tourism, and business services. These form part of seven service sector, which the EAC partner state made commitments to liberalize since 2010, when the EAC Common Market Protocol came into force. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me again underline that the role of service sector for economic development cannot be overemphasized. Services such as communication, transport, and financial services does provide inputs into all economic activities. Services are essential to facilitate trade, especially cross-border trade. They are essential to build our competitive structure in both agriculture and manufacturing sector. They are also essential in terms of strengthening our regional value chain. So as I conclude my few remarks, allow me to commend the EAC partner states through extraordinary meeting of Sectoral Council on Trade, Industry, Finance, and Investment for adopting the 90.2% of EAC tariff offer to CFTA for the product that falls under Category A. So we urge for a quick submission of this ambitious offer, as well as encourage one partner state that has not ratified the treaty, South Sudan, to expedite ratification. Finally, I would like to emphasize the following. 1, involvement of the service provider from five priority sectors in the preparation of the EAC schedule of commitment on trading services under CFTA. It is very important that we engage all those actors at the initial negotiation and at the initial offer. It is also important that I recommend that the collaboration of EAC governments and private sector in preparation of trade and service strategy is crucial in enhancing the region's competitiveness, which would then attract investment in the service sectors from African countries and outside the continent. There is also a strong need for a conducive environment for trade and services to adopt the changes which will be brought by liberalization of services with other African countries and tap into new emerging opportunities in the trade in services. I thank you and I wish you a fruitful deliberation. Asanteni sana.
Thank you very much, Executive Director, for your remarks. I think it's very well articulated on our sector we are discussing today, which is the trading services and their importance, their role to our economy, and the need for private sector, which are key implementer of this agreement, to make sure that they are proactive in terms of being involved and in terms of participating in the negotiation as well as preparation. If there is any representative from EAC Secretariat, please. I think there is none. So
good afternoon.
Oh, welcome, Director.
My name is Charles Samsana, and I'm going to read the statement by the Secretary General of EAC. Please allow me to do so.
Okay, karibu Musana.
Thank you. Panelists, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Secretary General, allow me read this statement. It is a great honor to join the EABC webinar on EAC's schedule of commitments on trade and services under the African Free Continental Area. Let me thank EABC Board and the CEO for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, AFC, the African Free Continental Area, brings on board the 54 African countries, with the exception of Djibouti, which is yet to sign, and of which 41 have ratified. This gives us a market of over 3 billion people and a GDP of over 2.5 trillion. This is an opportunity for SMEs to take advantage of and achieve economies of scale and improve efficiency at farm level. It will boost specialization and industrialization on the continent, and also increase local content and development of regional value chains, technology adoption, and improvement of infrastructure and connectivity. In terms of negotiations, we all know that as the EAC, we have been able to attain the threshold in trade required for the tariff lines in trade in goods, which is a very good achievement. And we are, as a region, actively participating in the negotiations. In trade in services, member states and non-party states have committed 46 initial and submitted 46 initial and revised offers covering 5 priority sectors, namely business, communication, financial services, tourism, and transport sectors. The Committee on Trade in Services and relevant subcommittees to undertake technical work required to achieve the protocol and services objectives are in place, approved by the Council of Ministers, and the negotiations submitted. The negotiations on submitted offers have commenced. Training has also been undertaken to build capacity of our negotiators, and this has helped the negotiators across the board to develop regulatory frameworks in cross-cutting and sector areas. As you may be aware, currently we as the EAC are developing a strategy on trade in services, and discussions are ongoing to review the draft by the consultants. This again will provide the region a better position, or make a region, put the region in a better position to negotiate at the continental level. This in mind, however, we need to note that our data and information on trade in services still needs improvement. There are areas for improvements. There are so many bottlenecks and gaps that need to be covered so that we can negotiate effectively based on information and data. Also, there are inconsistencies in partner states' legal and regulatory frameworks that need to be addressed as a region. There's also weak promotion of trade in services. However, as a region, we are committed to addressing these weaknesses, and such discussions and webinars offer us opportunity to identify how we can address some of these challenges. Indeed, our markets are small and fragmented, but if we work together as a region and at the continental level, we are able to develop capacity to attract big players in the service sector. Having said this, I wish you fruitful deliberations and thank you. We look forward to receiving your report and act upon it. Thank you for listening and thank you for your time. Bye-bye for now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Charles Omusana, on behalf of the Honorable Dr. Peter Mathuki for reading his mark, which actually it has enriched our discussion by giving us some initiative EAC as bloc has already taken in terms of being able to negotiate better liberalization of trade in services and Africa Continental. We hope the strategy on trade in services, which is in advanced stage, will assist the EAC partner take advantage of the benefit and opportunity offered under Africa Continental continental trade area. Another area actually which is very important is issue of data and information, which I think the service provider as well as the regulatory of trading services in the region can be help in terms of providing those data. So I think we are done with our remarks. Now we go to our business, and we are going to start with the first session, which is update on progress of negotiation of liberalization of trade in service and Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Here our panelist is Mr. Million Hate from Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. And I think Mr. Hate, you are around.
Yes, Good afternoon, Adrian. Yes, I am available. I'm waiting for your guidance.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe quickly, without wasting much of our time, we know under Africa Continental Free Trade Area Roadmap, Africa Union member have agreed to submit their trading service offer by end of 2020, as well as schedule of specific commitment were supposed to be finalized and adopted by January this year. As you update us on progress on the liberalization of trading services and Africa Continental Free Trade Area through the Protocol of Trading Services, can you kindly elaborate how Africa Union members are faring in terms of actualizing the agreed roadmap? And also, what are the main challenges preventing country from achieving this goal as set out in the roadmap? Welcome.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and good afternoon to you all. I think by Eastern African time, it's in the afternoon for us here in Accra at the Secretariat. It's still in the morning, 11:30. And I would like to thank you for inviting the Secretariat, the AfCFTA Secretariat, for this webinar. We are delighted to be part of it. And particularly at a time where we are about to implement the protocols which have already been agreed upon. And of course, we are in the process of finalizing the negotiations, at least those outlined in the first round of negotiations. So we are glad, particularly to be with the business community, who are the main segment of the stakeholders who will be key in the implementation process. At the end of the day, it will be the business community to put these protocols in practice. So thank you very much again. To get head on your question, I think yes, you are right. We had deadlines to for state parties to finalize the negotiation on trading services, like you outlined. The deadline that was first put as a timeline was, like you outlined, it was 2020. Then it was postponed for January 2021. But again now, for the finalization of negotiation at this stage, the deadline is set for June 2022. Just the last Council of Ministers, they have seen the progress that have gone so far, and so there was a need to give more time for this negotiation. So the latest would be by June 2022, the first round of negotiation, particularly when it comes to the priority services sectors, it will be June 2022. And why this happened, it could be for different reasons. Just before I outline that process, perhaps I think it was in the speech of the CEO that at this stage, out of 55 member states to the African Union, 54 are signatories of the AfCFTA. And the one remaining country, which I would like to correct it, I think someone mentioned it, it was Djibouti, but I think the correct one is Eritrea. Eritrea is the only country that has not signed the agreement. And out of these signatories, as far as I think the latest I have to confirm, but we have reached at least 40 41 or around there, those who have ratified this agreement, meaning they have brought it and as part of their national laws and regulations. The AfCFTA has become part of their national legal system. And then from these countries, it's interesting, you'll find that 46 state parties and non-state parties, they have submitted initial offers when it comes to the services, the 5 priority sectors. Maybe if I can share some of, is it possible like to share some of these slides that if you, with your permission, I can just show you some of the slides where the state and non-state parties have submitted their offers.
It's okay. You can project it. I think it's okay.
Thank you very much. Let us see if that is working. I'm not sure even.
Yeah, it is. Miriam, proceed. It is visible.
Is it visible?
Yeah.
Do you see the list of, I mean, do you see my
We are seeing
my
your
slides?
screen, but maybe you need to scroll a bit slightly down. Maybe slide 2.
Do you see now the list of countries with offers?
On my side, I can't see. I just see red color.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I see also. But it's okay. Perhaps I will just share.
I think you can share later. Then when we are send the report, we can communicate also. We can include it. Now we can see.
Oh, very good.
Visible. We can see
very good. Very good. Yes, thank you very much. So we have these 46 countries as state parties and non-state parties. By the way, there are state parties who have submitted their initial offers. Their offers, of course, some of them they are in the revision process. Also, they are revising them because they were requested. And interestingly, there are non-state parties who have not ratified the protocol or the agreement, but still they are in the process of negotiating trading services by submitting their offers. And the other countries, there are like 4 or 5 countries, state parties, who have who are yet to, maybe I would like to share this with you. Yes, there are like 4 countries who are state parties who have ratified the agreement, but they are yet to submit their offers, like Djibouti, Ethiopia, Sahrawi Republic, Tunisia, so on and so forth. But there are non-state parties. They have not submitted their offers. Eritrea is one country which has not yet signed, like I said earlier. Then you have Libya, Mozambique, Somalia, South Sudan. These are non-state parties. Some of them, they are signatories, but they have not yet ratified it, and they have not yet submitted their offers. So perhaps you'll be interested to see like one of members of the East African Community, South Sudan, is yet to ratify it and then to send their offers to the Secretariat. Having said that, I guess you mentioned what are the you requested what are the challenges for for state parties to not to achieve or at least meet the deadline of that were set by the heads of state and government. And you'll find that there are so many, as we go along in the negotiation process, there were ups and downs. And for some of us, of course, it was not an easy process. But for state parties, there were reasons from it. It starts from, I think, at the middle of the negotiations, and we had this COVID-19 that ravaged almost all countries in the world. So once you have that, there were measures that followed this pandemic, the lockdown situation that limited the possibility of having or conducting meetings of negotiations, not only for the Secretariat to call on member states or state parties for this negotiation, but also state parties in their own country, in their own place. They had so many measures. So the way out was to have meetings, like virtual meetings like this one, virtual meetings. But of course, for negotiations, the best option would be, of course, to sit down face to face and finalize it. And then you have the problem of, some of the state parties, they have formed blocks, or they are a regional economic community by themselves, like East African community by itself. So they are submitting their offers as a block, but in the process, they have to reach, most of them, I think their way of doing business is by consensus. So until they reach on that consensus, it definitely takes time. So for us to receive those offers or revised offers, that it took time because such blocks, they have to go through in their own process. And then, of course, what we have seen from the very beginning, the multiplicity or overlapping membership of some state parties among the regional economic communities, that also caused some, something that has to be refined, or that has to have clarity in how such state parties would commit or would send their initial offers. And then the other point that took time also the consultation process. Negotiating trade in services, it's not an easy task. So most state parties, they were requesting for consultation at their capital on many occasions. And as such, of course, we had to go by those important steps for the negotiation. And the other issue was also, like I mentioned earlier, there are state parties or member countries to the African Union who are as a signatory, and there are others who are non-state parties, or they have signed the agreement but they have not ratified. So it is in the process of clarifying what will happen if some of these countries continue negotiating, and at the end of the day, if they have not ratified, what will happen to their commitments. And then the other point I would like to raise in terms of the challenge in meeting the deadline is the capacity issue at the national level, especially. Like I said, trade in services, it's not an easy one, or it has so many versions of finalizing in the negotiation or submitting offers. For example, you need coordination. It touches upon so many sectors and subsectors. So from business services to transport service, for example, tourism, you have finance, you have telecom. So all those sectors, and they have subsectors under them. You need coordination between the business community, within the regulators, among other stakeholders, and so on and so forth. So the capacity issue at that level, at national level, is also was a challenge. So we have seen that. Not only that the lack of capacity, but the continuity of experts at national level has caused some problem, because we have noticed that some of the experts who have been in the process of the negotiations, we have lost some of them in terms of, like, they are shifted to other government offices, or they have decided to work in other places. So in those places, it's again, starting afresh in the negotiation process. And of course, the other thing we have to mention is some of these countries, they have other pressing national issues. They would like to give priority to that, and sometimes they just set aside the integration process, and they proceed with some of the pressing issues at national. So all this added some time to push. It had a push factor. So those are the reasons why we keep postponing the deadline to finalize the negotiations. I think I will stop there, and if you have more questions, I would like to attend to it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think because of interest of time, we'll come back to you during the discussion. So can we invite another panelist, Dorika Phil Nkata, Trading Service Advisor with EAC Secretariat, who is going to give us the status of developing EAC schedule of commitment on trading service in EAC. Dorika, we understand that EAC partners agreed that each country will prepare its national schedule of commitment for consolidation into EAC offer, which will be submitted to Africa Union Commission for the negotiation. How far have EAC partner state actualized this agreement, and what are main challenge the EAC partner state are facing in preparation of the national schedule of commitment as well as consolidated EAC offer? Welcome, Dorika.
Thank you, Adrian, and let me at the outset express our gratitude and appreciation to the East African Business Council for inviting us to participate in this webinar, which is very important and also will contribute towards developing an offer that is making sense for the EAC region. I will go straight to respond to the questions you've raised. Actually, I'll build on what Million has presented because some of the issues also touch upon the EAC. EAC has been preparing a draft initial offer on trading services comprising of specific commitments by 5 partner states, as EAC is a block. EAC is currently a common market, so 5 partner states, Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda, have developed national offers which have been consolidated into a regional offer. However, South Sudan, as Million pointed out, is not yet a state party and has not yet even submitted its initial offer. So, as he pointed out, the offer by EAC partner states, the 5 countries, is for the 5 priority sectors of business, communication, finance, tourism, and travel related, as well as transport services. So in line with the question you've posed, individual partner states developed their own national offers with various commitments in the various sectors and subsectors, as well as in the modes. So all these national offers were consolidated into a draft EAC consolidated offer. I still call it a draft because we are yet to revise and refine it. The draft consolidated offer, which we developed, has also been considered by the EAC experts at various levels. A lot of input has been put into the offer at various meetings, during several experts meetings. We have submitted this offer to the AfCFTA Secretariat, and it has been considered by state and non-state parties during the meetings of the Committee on Trade and Services. So that agreement the agreement to have a consolidated offer has been actualized. We have a draft offer. However, there have been quite a number of challenges which the states have faced in developing these national offers. And the first one, which Million also pointed out in his presentation, relates to the limited resources and capacities. As you're aware, services cover a whole host of stakeholders, looking at the various sectors that are being negotiated. And even the sectors also have a lot of subsectors whose stakeholders may also be different in those subsectors. So to reach out to all those stakeholders has been quite a challenge for the partner states at the national level, because of obviously resources to reach out to them, have comprehensive stakeholder consultations, but also the capacities, human capacities for the partners, for the partner states at the national level. The second challenge relates to general limited participation of the private sector during the national consultations. So yes, private sector has been involved, but their participation has been quite limited because of a number of reasons, but I will highlight two specifically. There has been little awareness of the AfCFTA processes, and I would say that not much effort has been put to sensitize the private sector on the AfCFTA. So in that regard, you find that the private sector has not been involved much and seeing the benefit and the interest in the AfCFTA processes and what it gives to them as the private sector, because they are the ones who do the business, who provide the services. The third challenge at the national level has been limited understanding, or I would say knowledge, of the technical aspects of developing offers. You find that the drafting of the offer itself is also a technical exercise that requires understanding of the terminologies and understanding what it entails, the intricacies. There's been little understanding of the services stakeholders, of the technical aspects of trading services generally, but also the implications of the offers they're making. So one has to understand, if you're making an offer, what's the implication for your industry? What's the implication for you as a company? How would you benefit? What kind of gains and what kind of, if at all, losses would be there? So there has been that little or limited knowledge and understanding from the stakeholders. The other challenge, which we also identified based on the discussions we've had with the national focal points, is a lack of comprehensive understanding of existing restrictions in the services sectors. What we mean by this is that because you find that regulatory framework, laws and regulations are what guide services. So because they do not have information on what kind of restrictions are existing in their regulations, it has been a challenge to really make offers that are reflective or that try to remove the restrictions in their national laws. So this has also been quite a challenge for them, because it requires understanding and undertaking audits and studies to understand the nature of the various services sector as far as the regulatory aspects are concerned. The other challenge has also, which has been identified, relates to the tight timelines for negotiations of the AfCFTA at the AfCFTA level. As Million has indicated, the various deadlines have not been met, but obviously because of very justifiable and reasons. So partner states have been faced with having tight deadlines at the AfCFTA level. And before they engage at the AfCFTA level, we normally have EAC expert preparatory meetings. And how you balance that with meetings and activities at the regional integration, at the regional level. So it's the same services experts who will be involved in the discussions and the negotiations at the AfCFTA level, but also the same people who are involved in the negotiations at the EAC level as far as services is concerned. So that kind of, those tight timelines and the balance has also been quite a challenge for EAC partner states, especially the focal points. One of the an additional challenge has been the impact of COVID-19, which Emilion pointed out earlier. I think the past 2 years, some of the consultations at the national level were undertaken online, to the extent that partner states believe that some of these meetings were not effective or efficient, in the sense that they could not get the necessary outcomes. So the impact of COVID on the effectiveness of the stakeholder consultations has also been highlighted as one of the challenges that member states, our partner states, have been faced with. Last but not least has been an issue, the technical aspect of developing the offer, in the sense that there's been instances where countries have been compelled to make GATS minus offers. What I mean by that is that you've technically GATS minus offers. Under the AfCFTA modalities, partner states or member states of the AU are to make offers that are in addition to what they committed at the WTO. So those member states that are WTO members have to make WTO plus commitments. So there have been instances where member states made commitments at the WTO without putting any limitations. Subsequently, regulatory frameworks have developed, laws have been passed in the countries that put restrictions, legitimately so, in their national laws. And now to make commitments at the AfCFTA level to inscribe such limitations has been a challenge, because technically then you'll be making the GATS minus offers at the AfCFTA level. So how that is balanced is quite a challenge for some countries in cases where they've put limitations in their laws subsequent after the commitments they had made under the WTO General Agreement on Trade and Services. So for challenges, those are some of the challenges that have been identified in the developing the national offers by the member states.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps, Adrian, I can stop there and wait for questions and discussions.
Okay, maybe another question is, we know under common marketing protocol, EAC partner state actually took different approach in terms of liberalization of trading services, which is not very harmonized when you look at the sub-sector which have been liberalized. And we are actually wondering, how will EAC ensure that the EAC offer and Africa Continental Free Trade Area is more liberal? We are talking of the GATS Plus, but at the same time is not undermining the integrity of commitment made under EAC Common Market Protocol. Because of the interest of time, also I would like to also you responded to another question where we are asking what will happen if some EAC partner state offer more favorable trade preference to other Africa Union members than what they have committed under EAC Common Market Protocol.
Thank you, Adrian, for those questions, which are quite interesting and very practical. So in terms of, for those joining the webinar who are not familiar with the EAC Common Market processes, EAC Common Market Integration of Services, so the EAC Common Market Protocol was signed in 2010, was signed and adopted in 2010. And under the protocol, there's an annex which has commitments made by partner states on liberalization of services. So it's a schedule of commitments on progressive liberalization of services under the Common Market Protocol. The focus currently is on 7 priority sectors of business, communication, distribution, education, financial, tourism and travel related, as well as transport. So you can already see that in these 7 sectors, 5 of these sectors are being negotiated at the AfCFTA level. So at the EAC level, there is agreement that partner states would make additional commitments at a future date to liberalize additional sectors that were not covered in the original 7 sectors. And this particular focus would be on energy services, environmental services, health and social services, construction and related services, and lastly, recreation, culture and sporting services. So basically, that's a brief introduction of the EAC integration agenda in terms of services. Now, at some point, of course, there's been a revision. Proposals have been made to revise the schedule of commitments as it is in the current Common Market Protocol. So there's a process that was initiated to review the commitments, but also to adopt regulations to facilitate movement of services under the EAC integration agenda. And then these schedules have been adopted by the relevant sectoral council, and obviously they are undergoing the process of legal scrubbing by the relevant sectoral council. So in developing this consolidated offer under the AfCFTA, the EAC had agreed, EAC as in EAC partner states had agreed on some guiding principles. And one of the fundamental principles was that the EAC schedule of commitments under the AfCFTA should not be less than what partner states have committed under the WTO GATS. This is in line with the modalities which were adopted at the AfCFTA level. But also, it must not be deeper than those commitments EAC have made under the EAC Common Market Protocol in those priority sectors, which I pointed out earlier. So it should be less than what is at the EAC level, but more than what is under the WTO. So this has been one of the guiding principles EAC adopted at the outset before we even started developing the offer. So EAC partner states had to ensure that the offer is more liberal than at the WTO GATS, but at the same time should be less than what is in the EAC CMP. So what is also fundamental to point out is that in developing this offer, partner states at some point had agreed on a minimum threshold of at least 50% of total subsectors in the 5 priority sectors, and that was about 63 subsectors. But obviously, at the time of refining and developing the offer, this was dropped. This guiding principles dropped. So the initial offer also took into consideration those subsectors and sectors where all the partner states had made full commitments at the EAC level. All this was done to ensure that the integrity of the common market is not lost. You don't make commitments that are deeper than what is at the EAC level. If you look at the WTO, most of the EAC partner states made very, very few commitments at the WTO level. Like, for example, if you look at Tanzania, it made one commitment in one subsector at the WTO level. So it has room to make WTO plus GATS plus commitments. At the same time, balancing that with their commitments at the EAC level. So EAC partner states have carefully considered their F offers and ensure that this principle is met. If you look at the draft initial offer at the AfCFTA, this principle has been applied to the core. So you would not find that there are cases where countries have made commitments that are more liberal to the AfCFTA than under the EAC Common Market Protocol. However, if some partner states are to offer more favorable trade preferences to the AU members than they have committed under the Common Market Protocol, this will be clear breach of Article 18 of the Common Market Protocol on the most favored nation principle. So basically, what the principle says is that each partner state should, upon the coming into force of the protocol, accord unconditionally to service and service suppliers of other partner states treatment no less favorable than that it accords to services and service supply of other partner states or any third party or a customs territory. So you cannot grant more favorable treatment to third parties than you grant to EAC partner states. So you obviously have to grant equal treatment. You have to grant the same treatment as you're granted to the third party. Third party in this case would be AU members. Adrian, I hope I have responded to your questions. I welcome questions or just discussions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dorica. I think now we move to another session where we are going to invite Professor Gerhard Erasmus. And I think we are going to talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area Protocol Training Services. And our focus will be on the basic features, flexibility, and the regulatory concern. I think, Professor, welcome, because I understand you wanted to put to project some slide which will guide our discussion. Welcome, Professor.
Yes, thank you, Adrian, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I did prepare a set of slides. I did send it to you, Adrian. I don't know whether it is on display there, but even if it is not,
Adrian, we cannot hear the professor. If we can increase the volume.
Okay, Professor, can you increase your volume? Some people cannot hear you.
Okay, let me try. Increase the volume. Let's see what we can do about that. On my part, the volume is at a very high level. Can you hear me or can't you hear me?
We can hear you now. We can hear you now, Professor.
Okay, I've just done a very primitive thing. I moved closer to the screen. Okay.
We can hear you. I can hear you.
I'm happy to hear that. Adrian, is it possible to put the PowerPoint presentation that you have, which I sent earlier, on display, or shall I just discuss the content and then you can disseminate it later? Okay, let's.
Yeah, I think go on, Professor. Go on and discuss. Then it will be shared.
Okay.
In the interest of time.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I've listened to the discussion of the previous participant, and in particular, the one by Dorica, and I'm not an expert on EAC services, but I think what is coming out of the discussion quite clearly is that there is a need to understand the negotiating process. The private sector stakeholders, as was pointed out by both speakers, ultimately governments don't provide these services that will be negotiated as part of the AfCFTA annex belonging to the Protocol on Trading Services. It will be the private sector. So it's vitally important that the stakeholders, the private sector, are involved in making and preparing these offers that will be negotiated on a continental level. Now, I've been asked to talk a little bit about flexibilities in the AfCFTA Protocol on Trade and Services, and how the partner states in the EAC can take advantage of them. Let me just mention that the AfCFTA Protocol on Services is part of the bigger compact, of the bigger arrangement. The AfCFTA agreement actually is already in force. It is in force since 30 May 2019, but there's no trade in services or trade in goods under the AfCFTA because the outstanding elements must still be finalized. Now, for services, this entails the offers of the member states, of the state parties. There must be schedules and that will indicate their offers under the AfCFTA Protocol on Trade and Services. And we are a little bit at a disjointed moment because the overall agreement is in force, but then the detailed negotiations and the offers by the state parties and non-state parties must still be finalized. So it is important that we understand what is actually going on. What is going on is that you are in the middle of very serious and important negotiations to finalize an element, a vital element, before trade in services can take place. The second design challenge that you have is the partner states of the EAC, as we have heard from Dorica, they are already bound by the commitments that they have as partner states of the East African Community, which purports to be a common market. You've got a common market protocol, and therefore it is vital that these member states of the partner states of the EAC agree with each other on the joint offer that they will make as part of the AfCFTA negotiations in order to protect the integrity of the East African Community, East African Common Market. The interesting thing is that the EAC will not be a party to the AfCFTA. The individual partner states of the East African Community are state parties when they have signed and ratified. And we have heard that South Sudan is not yet in that position. That is a different challenge that you will have to accommodate in any case at some future time. So it is important to understand that the AfCFTA is designed as a free trade area, not a customs union or a common market, while the East African Community has gone through much deeper procedures and processes of integration. You are beyond a free trade area. You are claimed to be a customs union as well as a common market. And a common market has a single market. So you will have to protect your integrity of your own integration exercise while you promote deeper integration in services on the continent, because that is what the AfCFTA is about. The Article 19 of the AfCFTA agreement says that the REC FTAs, not all the RECs, the REC FTAs are building blocks of the AfCFTA. So it is a difficult balancing act that you're undertaking. You must take on board the private sector. And I heard all the constraints that you're referring to, the difficulties and the lack of understanding and so on. But this is, if they still do not understand, yes, we can stop at this one for a moment, Adrian, at this slide, because it provides, no, the one that you just had on the screen that provides an overview of the architecture of the AfCFTA. That is useful. Okay, that's this one, yeah. Can we pause there? This is the legal architecture of the AfCFTA. We've got the founding agreement there at the top, and then we've got the phase 1 negotiations, phase 2, and phase 3 is in the future. Now, phase 1, all these blocks in green, that is supposed to be done and up and running because the agreement is already in force. By the way, the agreement is defined to include every single legal instrument of the AfCFTA. In other words, the founding agreement on the top, the protocol on trade and goods, protocol on services, dispute settlement, protocols still to be finalized, negotiated on investment, competition, IP rights, and whatever is included in the future. So all of this together is the AfCFTA agreement. Now, if we look at services, we see that protocol has been finalized, but the annexes have not. And this first annex is the vital outstanding ingredient, the schedules of specific commitments of whom? Of the states that participate in the negotiations. Now, ideally, they should be the state parties because they have already ratified, but this process includes non-state parties too. And by the way, I'm always tickled to understand how non-state parties can negotiate together with state parties that have already ratified on the basis of consensus, which must then be adopted and which will not bind the non-state parties. The non-state parties cannot be bound by something which they have not yet ratified. But nevertheless, we know that is how things are negotiated. They are equally active in the negotiations. But the implication seems to me that all of you carefully monitor what non-state parties offer as part of commitments, which they are expected in good faith then to honor. So they must ratify and not subsequently change any of the commitments that they have made during the negotiations. But since we're running out of time, let me say something about the specific question that was posed to me. What are the flexibilities in this document, the Protocol on Trade in Services, that you can use in order to finalize your schedule of specific commitments? This has been finalized. The Protocol on Trade in Services stands. It is done and dusted. The outstanding element is the annex on schedules of specific commitments. Now, the question that was put to me is, what is in this document, the Protocol on Trade in Services, that can be used in order to finalize this one? Now, I've read through that protocol once again and looked for indications of such possible protocols. But actually, and Dorica suggested that in her presentation, the negotiations for the schedules of specific commitments, what is the first annex under the Protocol on Trade and Services, that must be conducted in terms of its own modalities. So if we want to find out what flexibilities and space exist during this phase of negotiating the specific commitments, you will have to go back to the modalities that were adopted for the purposes of finalizing the schedules of specific commitment. And we know from Dorica's presentation that one of them is, well, she mentioned two. One explicitly stated and the other one by implication. The first one is we must go WTO plus. Otherwise, why do you do it? She indicated what the problems are there. But the other one, which is implied for the EAC, is that you must protect the integrity of your own common market. So to finalize and to summarize, what flexibilities can we find in this overall process that may be used to give you some extra space? Now, let me say that in the AfCFTA agreement itself, this agreement, there is that Article 5, which contains the basic principles under the AfCFTA, and one of them is about variable geometry. Now, variable geometry cannot really help us very much at this stage, because variable geometry really means that you are given more time to implement your obligations. So I'm afraid variable geometry is not a principle of flexibility or an element of flexibility that will allow you as a participant in government to have a less onerous obligation. And that brings me to the question, what is meant with flexibilities? Negotiations, and we discovered that, we heard from Dorica very clearly, These negotiations are about accommodating the offensive and the defensive trade interests in services of all the participating countries. Now, each and every one of these 54 countries have offensive and defensive interests in trade in goods and in services. Now, you in the EAC are probably at the more advanced stage because you've got a common market and you've got a protocol on the common market, and you've got an annex to that protocol on services, and you've got a greater number of services sectors that you want to integrate. So actually, I think the EAC is in quite an advanced position in terms of having negotiated and accepted commitments and having implementation experience of services. And I think you are on the right track, Dorica, when you say that we must, or you must, reconcile and accommodate, in the first instance, the integrity of your own protocol and your own EAC integration. But there are two provisions that I want just briefly to mention in the protocol on trade in services. The one is Article 7 and the other one is Article 8. Now remember, the protocol on trade in services, we can't reopen those negotiations. That stands. That's a done deal. But and actually, the protocol on trade and services does not contain the modalities for how you negotiate this annex. In the ideal world, this agreement would never have been ratified and entered into force unless everything was done and completed. As a matter of fact, in Article 8 of the agreement of the AfCFTA, there is a principle that it says it's a single undertaking. But that is not how things panned out. So you now have to, I would say, the most important principles, elements that guide the process that is going on here have already been identified. It is protect the integrity of the EAC common market and find out exactly and clearly what are your offensive and defensive interests. And thirdly, it's about reciprocity. If you, as country X in the AAC, are interested in trade in services in another country in the continent with whom at the moment you haven't got those trade and services relationships, in other words, outside the EAC, if you are interested in a deal there, and they are interested in trade and services in your country, how do you reconcile that? And for that you will have to negotiate. That is about reciprocity. The two provisions that we can mention in the AfCFTA protocol on services are Articles 7 and 8. Article 7 says, in order to ensure increase in beneficial participation in all parties, the state party shall provide special consideration to the progressive liberalization of services sector and modes of supply which promote critical sectors of growth, social and sustainable development. And then the second paragraph is more important. The state party shall take into account the challenges that may be encountered by state parties and may grant flexibilities such as transitional periods within the framework of action plans on a case-by-case basis to accommodate special economic situations. This flexibility deals with time frames, and it must be given on a transitional period and on a case-by-case basis. That will not help the EAC as a joint.
Professor, with interest of time, can you please summarize?
Okay, I'll do so. I'll stop immediately. Article 7 provides for certain flexibilities, but I don't think it will happen. It will be of much assistance to the EAC as a whole. And Article 8, final one, says each state party may regulate and introduce new regulations on services. But this is also not a true flexibility because it applies to when this whole scheme is already in force. And as we've seen, it is not the case. You still have to negotiate your schedules of specific services commitments. Thank you, Adrian. I'll stop right there in my tracks.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor, for the presentation on area of the flexibility. Now, I think it is time for our discussion. We are inviting questions. I think we can take 3 questions quickly. Please direct your question to the panelists and be very brief when you are coming up with a question. Any questions so far? Raise your hand, then we'll see and we'll allow you to.
Adrian, there are questions on the chat box. Dark raised an important question on what happens to GATS minus commitment in the CFTA. They simply eliminated from the schedules because service provider could simply refer to WT commitment and trade under them, rather than the CFTA commitments. Maybe a professor would first respond to that.
Yeah, I can quickly respond, Adrian, if you want to, or would you like to ask to allow the other questions?
I think we can have another question from the package bed. Please, can you?
Hi, Chair. I hope I'm not losing the context here, but I wanted to ask that we have not discussed anything on manufacturing and rules of origin here, because like in our sector, which is apparel and textile, we have been discussing about rules of origin, and I understand now only South Africa is the one which is opposing it. So just wanted to have a take on that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Macron.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I don't know what happened. I thought that you had asked me to do a presentation. Can you please clarify whether I'm still scheduled to answer the question you sent me?
Can you come back again? I can't hear you properly.
I'm asking, you had asked me to do a presentation, so I do not know whether, is it still on or that is no longer the case?
Is still on. After this discussion, we are coming to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think, Professor, you can respond the question on the GATS miners, which actually came to our chat. And I think the question of the Mr. Package on rule of origin and the tariff regarding manufacturing, although it's not part of trading services, but also maybe you can give him some sort of clarification.
Yes, I'll try my best. The first question, the gentleman who put that question is quite right, that if there are commitments that are for the services protocol of the AfC Fda that are GATS minors, then of course the relevant countries can trade with each other under GATS rules. But that is only possible if all the relevant parties are members of the WTO. So I will agree with you, but add one qualification. If there are the strange development that the GATS minus commitments in the outcome of these negotiations, maybe for the reasons that Dorica has shared with us, then it will at least have the effect that countries on the continent that have previously not shared any preferential trade arrangement with each other and are not jointly and at the same time members of the WTO will have a fallback position on which they can trade. That's the only benefit that I can see, but that obviously will be limited to a very small number of countries. Then as far as rules of origin are concerned, the question was not really a question, but an observation, if I understand correctly, that there must be a clarification on the rules of origin. Now, the rules of origin, of course, relate to the 2 outstanding matters for the protocol on trade in goods. We also still haven't got any preferential trade in goods under the AfCFTA. And the reason for that is that the two vital building blocks for trade in goods for an FTA, a free trade area, is there must be tariff schedules, the tariff commitments and the tariff reductions, and there must be rules of origin. Only if a rule of origin applies to a particular good, if it qualifies in terms of the applicable rule of origin, then is it entitled to the lower rate, to the preferential treatment. And sir, you're quite right. That is still, it's still outstanding. And the reason why it's outstanding is because these are very sensitive matters. And you've said that you understand that only South Africa is of a particular opinion, but that is exactly what will happen in these negotiations. They are about the offensive and defensive trade interests of the parties. And if they are not happy with the reciprocity that is involved, then of course they will not make those commitments. So I'm afraid your suspicion is correct, namely that the rules of origin for areas such as textiles, and there apparently are others like automotives, tobacco, and sugar, are outstanding, and it doesn't surprise me that that is the case. But that is a debate that belongs to trade in goods discussions, and I think the organizers of today's session are focusing on trade and services. That is as far as I can take it.
Hello, okay, thank you, Professor. I think I can see another hand from Million.
No, Adrian, before another hand, there are two other questions for Professor in the chat box. One is the movement of labor manpower catered for under CFTA. I've not heard anything on it. Then another one from Gabriel, for trade in service mode 4, is there any consideration in the CFTA and the EAC protocols?
Yeah, those two questions are for Dorica. She's far better placed to answer them. Please press on her button. She's in the action there and she knows what is going on there. Dorica, come to our assistance, please. And Million too.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Actually, Million would be better placed to respond, but I can still say something on it. Under the FCTA, there's in the commitments member states are making, there is a mode 4. There are mode 4 commitments being made. There's an agreement on what categories of natural persons would be included, what categories member states could inscribe in their schedules of commitments when making commitments. I think categories such as independent service providers, contractual service providers, business visitors, graduate trainees, and all that. So yeah, there's provision for that in the FCTA. But my focus, I would speak about the EAC protocol. So I'll take you back a little bit in terms of background. If you look at the Common Market Protocol as it is, on mode 4, there's an inscription that says in accordance with Annex 2 on movement of workers. So basically linking the schedule on movement of services to the annex on movement of workers. So it's not clear what you're committing there. So you have to look at the schedule on workers. So seeing this, partner states realize that this is problematic. There's no clarity as to what commitments you're making because you're bringing workers, which is different from service providers, into the ambit, into the context of services. So the partner states decided to review their commitments and make specific commitments on mode 4, clearly putting commitments and the categories of natural persons who are service providers and would be allowed to benefit, to enjoy the rights and freedoms provided under trading services under the Common Market Protocol. So the revision process has been undertaken. There are revised schedules of commitments that countries made, and these were considered by the relevant sectoral committee on trade. They were actually adopted, they are undergoing legal scrubbing process. I think because it takes a while, so they're in this relevant sectoral council for legal affairs, legal and judicial affairs. In addition to that, there is also a draft regulations that should be read together with the revised issues of commitments, because it's the draft regulations that give you the categories of natural persons that are allowed under Mode 4 as far as the schedule of commitments on services is concerned. I must say that the process has taken quite a while to finalize these revised schedules. They were adopted by STP, by the Sectoral Council. Even the regulations themselves, I think a couple of outstanding issues remain, but the process has moved, unfortunately, at a very, very slow pace. So yeah, there's a provision for Mode 4 at the ESC level, but also at the AfCFTA level. Million, you can add anything. You can also add something to what I've said. Thank you.
Million, can you be very briefly before we go to another session, please?
Thank you very much, Adrian and Dorica and Professor. Yes, I think very briefly and on a practical note, for those for the GATS minus commitment, what we are doing is once the initial offers are negotiated and revised and finalized, we at the Secretariat, we go through a verification process. One of the elements we see in this verification process is whether they comply with the guidelines and modalities for negotiating trading services. So if we find that the offer is a GATS minus, which go against the expectation and the guidelines of that's already adopted, then it won't be part of the annex. So we'll send it back to with recommendations and areas where it goes GATS minus. We'll identify that and we'll send it back to the state party who offered that GATS minus offers. So the implication of this would be then for that state party, obviously the way things work at the AfCFTA, it's on a reciprocal basis. So unless they satisfy their offers as such as stated as a GATS plus modalities, and they may not be part of, or they may not access other market openings through that are offered preferentially under the AfCFTA. So those I would like to make that point first. Then the other one that was made on the movement of labor or manpower, and I think it's the same as for the other question on trading services for Mode 4. I think Dorica mentioned she has mentioned a very good starting point that from our side we have developed. Yes, the Mode 4 is intended to cover such business persons, how they will be covered in the agreement, how they can move from one state party to the other. So to have a common understanding, what we have done is at the Secretariat, we have developed a technical note on the common definition of common categories of natural persons. So there are like 5 or 6 categories of persons: managerial, independent, service sector, so on and so forth, with the definition and everything. So when a state party puts, for example, managers are allowed to stay or to provide their services in such and such manner, then we know what that manager means across the board. And then it also outlines the conditions of entry of this category of persons, and the period of stay of these natural persons has to be indicated in such offer. So all those are outlined. I think this will also answer someone in the participant list have asked the same question. So I think that will cover the both questions. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Okay, thank you very much, Million, for the clarification. Now I think we go to another session. This is a...
Sorry, before you go, Adrian, I'm very sorry to come back, but I hear the acronym of the AfCFTA being called AfCFTA in most of the speeches or presentations. Please, I have the duty to correct this, I think. So it is AfCFTA. AfCFTA, African Continental Free Trade Area, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, our session now is on EAC, defensive and offensive interest under EAC shade of commitment on trade in services. And our panelist is Mr. Macon from TRAPCA. Mr. Macon, are you in?
Yes, I'm here, Adrian. Thank you very much.
Okay. Our first question is, the EAC partner state have planned to negotiate the liberalization of trade in services as a bloc. What are key issues which will inform the preparation of the EAC negotiating position for the shadow of commitment as well as the regulatory framework in the 5 agreed priority sectors? Hello, Mr. Macon? Patrick? Mr.
Adrian, I hope you can hear me.
Now we can hear you. Now.
All right, thank you so much.
We are not hearing from you.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much to the EABC for this invitation, and it's good to see familiar faces, my colleague Million and the colleagues who made presentations. Let me just rush and go through this fairly quickly. The first point I would like to make is to say that we probably have to sit back a little bit. And I know we're talking about the EAC and, of course, the offensive and the defensive interests. We have to take a step back and remember why the current framework we are using to liberalize services came into being. So I'm trying to take you back to the 80s as well as the 90s, up to the creation of the World Trade Organization. And my point is, we have to remember that the template we are using to schedule commitments was, for all intents and purposes, designed from a defensive point of view. We, as the developing countries at the time when negotiating the Uruguay round, were not in a position to have our services markets opened up, overly opened up, so to speak, and therefore the tool itself, it's such that it basically adopts a defensive approach. And therefore, the schedules of commitments, if you think about them, and for those of you who've gone through them, you look at the various entries, and already Dorica said how technical they are and how complex they may be. When you look at them, they are about two things. They are about self-selection as well as self-paced liberalization. That's what this is about. They are not about economic integration. And I think we need to squarely think about that. Why? Because as we begin to have this conversation rolling on, I can't help it but remember a couple of negotiations we had at the World Trade Organization a couple of years. And of course, it's like deja vu, this thing is coming back, but we have to recall that the schedule itself, the template, is set on the defensive tone. That means whatever the EAC may profess as its own interests or rather, let's say the advances that the EAC is making out there, they also will be meeting up with other countries that are able to make use of the same schedule in a way as to defend themselves. So I think that's the first point to make. The second point is to say that as the EAC considers its offensive and defensive interests, we also have to remember the period in time in which we are at. We are not in the 19th century. We are not in the 19th century. We are in the 21st century. However, the approach that we are currently taking, we are precisely doing what we were doing when negotiating the WTO agreements before 1995, which is a context that is set within a 19th and the 20th century. And I'll explain why. As you can imagine, when we look at the technological advances that have taken place up to now, it seems to me, of all the schedules that I've seen, and please don't ask me how I got them, but all the schedules that I've seen that have been submitted to the AfCFTA, I do not see the 21st century dimension being factored into what we are having at the moment. And therefore, if I were to be asked to say on the offensive side of the interests of the EAC, what should be done? My point is, let's try to go back to the drawing board and then try to factor in the new advances that we have in the 21st century and try to reconcile those against the current offers that we have put on the table. And I'll give you a couple of examples to make sense out of what I'm saying. For example, look at a simple let's say sector, finance, and we know that it is one of the priority sectors that we're having under the AfCFTA. What is happening in the finance sector is amazing, because today businesses can actually make payments outside of the normal regulatory system. So if you are having a country that does have market restrictions in the area of financial services, no problem. Today I can use the crypto currency form of platforms to actually make payments totally over, let's say going overboard and not using the regulatory system in place. And therefore businesses are already finding other ways of doing payments, even in areas where governments are still holding on to some form of restrictions. And for that matter, I believe we need to also factor those in, because these new nuances can only increase in terms of the abundance as well as their use by various entities. I would say, if you think about the financial services being one of the key services that rather sectors of interest under the AfCFTA, it's like, if you recall, it's like we're at what I call M-Pesa inflection point. When M-Pesa came around, there were a lot of doubts and skeptics as to how it will roll out. But look at where we are today. Similarly, I may not be a prophet, but it seems to me that these new innovations in the financial services sector may imply that we are actually going to find some of the regulatory restrictions we have basically being redundant, so to speak, because they will be of no use. And I think it is therefore important for one to state that, and therefore I think the community needs to consider this in its schedule of commitment, the offers that are being made. The other issue pertains to what has been discussed at length, and this really has to do with services liberalization and the extent to which there has to be consistency with the common market protocol. I think all that has been said is well and good, but let's also consider this particular dimension. We do not have rules and regulations in the WTO, at least in the context of trade and services or GATS, that speak to what countries should do in contexts that pertain to common market. So therefore, we are having a little bit of a nuance that I think we need to consider. The liberalization of trade under services regime, we know that, of course, we talked about the WTO standards and how we do not have to go WTO minus, and well and good, and I think the point is well made. But let's remember that liberalization of trade and services, it is not only in a trade context. That means there are services that are being liberalized under other regimes other than trade and services. For example, we know that in the area of of transport in the context of SADC. I can drive my car from my own country, Lesotho, all the way up to Tanzania using my Lesotho license. What do you call that? And for example, under COMESA, they have the yellow card COMESA insurance scheme. What do you call that? And my point again is to say that there are those areas in which services are being liberalized actually, but not within the context of trade in services as we have it at the moment. So now, if then you take this compensation around the notion of being consistent with the common market related provisions, Article 18, I believe, if we take that and then we ask ourselves, is it really true that all the EAC countries in this context are fully consistent in terms of the market opening under Article 18? I think the jury is out here because, again, we do not only have one form of liberalization of services. We can go to the health services, and I think there's a lot of examples that we can get in that particular area. We are having services that are being offered on remote basis. And again, we are seeing also that even surgical procedures can be performed on a remote basis. If you are saying under Mode 4, and of course in terms with the health regulations of a given country, maybe a doctor from South Africa is not allowed to come and practice in Tanzania, no problem. But technology may allow a South African doctor to actually practice medicine in Tanzania. So how do you deal with these conundrums? And therefore, what I'm saying is that let's also factor in the 21st century nature of the evolution of trading services, and for that matter, being able to factor them in within the agreement, that's the protocol itself. And I think this is quite important. And also, I would like to make one last comment on this. And this comment has to do with our conceptualization of trade. And I believe that there's something really, I would say, not going on right in how we perceive it. It's almost like we have so very much believed in what we've been given by countries that introduced these agreements, of course, not African countries, for example, trade in services. The way in which we delink trade in services from trading goods, from IP, and all these other different aspects, investment and the rest, it really astounds me. Why? Because we talk about trade in services, if we divorce it from the market realities and how it interacts with other forms of trade policy, whether it be trading goods, I believe we are losing a huge opportunity. And I believe, again here, what I would say is to say, let the community consider looking at all these different protocols and their interrelationships. Unfortunately, with what my colleague Million has said and Dorica about the limited participation of the private sector, of course, we are at loss because the extent to which we may link the protocol on trading services, trading goods, and many others that are coming, e-commerce all the way down to the investment protocol, it has to be informed by the private sector realities. And I hope this is something that one can do, because we did some work a couple of years ago in a different context in the area of trading services. And we involved the private sector. And I wish, if time permits, I can show the audience the kind of analysis that is required to bring in the private sector to provide inputs into the negotiations by the policymakers. Like Professor Erasmus said, policymakers do not trade. They are not the ones who are providing services. It is the private sector. So with that, Adrian, I think I will hold it there. And then hopefully, if time permitting, I can basically just show a snippet of what it means to involve the private sector in trade negotiations and the sort of a framework that may be considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Macron. I think people have heard you about the involvement of the private sector, the importance of involving the private sector, especially the service provider, in terms of putting input in the negotiation. But now there is challenge. There is this challenge of multiple membership of EAC partner state. Some are in SADC. We know, for example, Tanzania in SADC. Other country, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, they are under COMESA. And also, I think they have some sort of their commitment in trade. How EAC can balance these issues when they are negotiating trading services under Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Briefly, Mr.
A very interesting question, Adrian. the issue that you are raising is actually quite critical, and it has to do with the conflict of laws and the inconsistencies between the treaties that the EAC countries are parties to. And what that does, for those of you from the legal fraternity, you know very well that we will have to go to the Vienna, the VCLT, the Vienna Convention Law of Treaties, to find out how to resolve these particular issues. What I can say to you is that, to an extent that the EAC treaty does not provide any references as to what should happen when a new treaty comes on board and part of or all of its members are part of that particular treaty. So what I'm talking about is the relationship between treaties. If there is no provision to that particular effect, unfortunately, it means that we may actually have the EAC state parties signing on to the AfCFTA only to find themselves having breached their commitments under the EAC treaties. So this is where we are. And by extension, some of the EAC state parties are also state parties under COMESA treaties as well as under SADC treaties. The same thing will happen. It means that they would actually have breached their commitments under those particular treaties. So it's a legal matter that will have to be addressed. And of course, we can go and stretch this further and talk about the Abuja Treaty and what it says. And all of this, I think, if I may just sum it up, it is to say, maybe we are in kind of like a serious problems because countries are almost on the brink. In fact, in some instances, they have already, but in this context, they are almost on the brink of breaching some of their commitments under the existing treaties.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Macon from TRAPCA. Now I think we are inviting Dr. Ife Ogo, a regional coordinator specialist and Africa Continental Free Trade Area from UNDP. Doctor, welcome. Okay, let me start with a question where we are saying harnessing the huge potential of Africa Continental Free Trade Area in the service sector requires strong commitment by a broad range of the stakeholder, including member state, regional economic community, the Africa Union Commission, and its partner institution, including development partners, as well as the private sector. What each sector should do to realize this huge potential, especially development partner and the private sector. Back to you, Doctor.
Hello, and thanks very much, and greetings to all. So I think a good starting point is to look at what is being done. As you have said, the negotiations on the member states are beginning to also take steps in terms of preparedness and readiness and to see how to implement the AfCFTA. The initiatives such as this very one where, there's exploring of what the options are under the AfCFTA. So that's a good starting point to also see that the various players are also beginning to take some action as to what to do to, implement the AfCFTA, especially for services. And then another viewing point is to go back into the treaty.
If I suggest that you put on your video as a presenter for the interested participant.
I see. I do apologize. I'm struggling with my bandwidth, so that might take me off it entirely. So I'm just going to try and power through. So another viewing point, another point from which to answer the question is to say what is supposed to be done, and this takes you back into itself. It takes you back into the protocol and to say what is the overall objective, what are the things the member states are supposed to do, and who else is supposed to do what. And a good way to see what should be done by the various players is to check and say, the overall objective of the AfCFTA for services is to allow, certain kinds of trade and for certain kinds of suppliers to move as well. And so a good way to check is to say, is this being met? Why is this not being met? How is this to be met? And does this action complement this being met or not? So just to say that on this, you have essentially tried to put the answer forward in how you ask it. There's also a need also to coordinate and to see who is doing what. Very much you see everyone has the same idea, every institution has the same idea, which is not a bad thing in itself. It just means that there's clarity on what needs to happen. But it's always good to also say, you know, who else is doing this, who else has a mandate to do this, and how to cooperate in terms of going forward. So back to you, moderator.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Another question is, which type of support the development partner should provide to Africa Union members, which will contribute to successful finalization of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Services negotiation?
Right. So I'd start by highlighting that this is a process led by the member states themselves. And it's something that the AU and now the AfCFTA Secretariat are coordinating. So in that sense, it is very clear who owns the process and who is responsible for it. And I mean, we see from the meeting of the ministers that held in January that there is still a clear sense of the urgency to conclude the negotiations. There's a new timeline for this and the expectations as to what should be done. So, you know, that is quite clear. So, I mean, that also that there is space still to support the member states in terms of what is going on, especially in the states themselves. We are aware of some sectoral studies, some impact assessments to inform the choices that the member states make. And more broadly, there's work ongoing on AfCFTA implementation strategies to also say, now that the negotiations are ongoing, some of the member states have a clear sense of what they would like to see happen in their sectors. And so how do they then integrate that more broadly into the work that they are doing to implement the AfCFTA. With the private sector as well, there's scope to also, just like this one, to say, you know, what needs to happen to engage in the AfCFTA? How can they find the opportunities? How do they scale? What are the options and the where? So I think with that two-pronged approach, then there's scope to not only negotiate the AfCFTA, but also to see how, you know, that leads to implementation.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. The last one, which is very important question, is what are practical steps to enhance readiness of operators in service sectors to take advantage of opportunity in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
Right. I would say actually a good place is to ask them that themselves and say, you know, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? And you know what do they need? I think a mistake that is often made is to assume that in the policy space there is a clear idea of what has to be done. I think engagement should precede the answering of that. But it's just generally speaking, I tend to make the argument that services doesn't always get as much attention as goods. Perhaps because it is opaque, it's not as clear, it's not as streamlined or as binary as goods. But I think if you look at some of the things that are happening for goods, for example, the reporting platform by UNCTAD, I think that says, you know, if there's a problem, if a trader encounters a problem, how to actually report and resolve it. You know, is there scope to think about that kind of thing for services? And then when you think about Article 27, that speaks to specific groups, so small enterprises, informal enterprises, youth-led enterprises, you know, all of this work that is ongoing on the AfCFTA, to what extent has that also engaged these groups? To what extent does it account for these groups? I think that in the asking of that kind of thing, then you begin to say, oh, here are the opportunities to actually enhance the participation of the private sector in the AfCFTA. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Now we are going to have a discussion which is going to target the second session we have. So we are expecting some question directed to Macron as well as Dr. Ogo. Any questions so far? If you have any question, please raise your hand and then you can be very brief. Yes, Karibu.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Again, allow me to convey my appreciation to Dr. Ife and Makonge for elaborate presentation. in terms of the status of implementation and the legal and regulatory framework. I think Makong has made a very good attempt in terms of how our treaties are conflicting. And I wanted again to pick it from the professor presentation when he did mention about the principle of variable geometry and how to apply it. It is still not clear, Adrian, and to all the presenter that EAC, as they mentioned, that EAC is at a deeper integration vis-a-vis other state parties or other lakes. So how are we going to reconcile that? It hasn't come out clear how we are already at common market and CFTA is under African Continental Free Trade Area. We are still at the first level. So how do we reconcile? What are the governing principles in terms of aligning our advancement vis-a-vis those other state parties which are still at an initial stage? So realignment, I thought maybe all the presenter could mention, and what are the benefits to the private sector? Again, this session is targeting the private sector, and I want to appreciate the comments made that private sector should be at the forefront of all these negotiations. It hasn't happened, but we need to take a note of that. So I wanted maybe the two presenters to reflect on that, the conflicting interests of our treaties and overlapping membership.
Okay, thank you, CEO. I think before they respond, let's have another question from Esther Katende. Madam, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I wanted to ask Mr. Makong and Million maybe, what do they think should be East Africa's strategy, the East African Community's strategy to benefit from the AfCFTA on behalf of its business persons? How should we strategize? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, when you are responding, Mr. Makong, there is another question from our chat, which is asking, how do we reconcile liberalization in service in one side and a regulatory framework failed to oversee, for instance, financial sector as depicted using payment system out of the formal way? Okay, we welcome panelists who are supposed to respond to those questions.
Thank you very much, Adrian. If I may take a step, and then hopefully my colleagues will add on to a couple of points that I have. There's a bigger, and I call it an elephant in the room in the continent. And maybe we need to clarify it in a manner that everybody can appreciate where we are and the complications of what we are creating ourselves. Already there was a conversation, of course, and thanks to the executive director, about the principle of variable geometry, which is a multi-speed type of liberalization. However, I would take the meeting back to a conversation we have at the multilateral level concerning whether the regional trade agreements are a building block or a stumbling block to the multilateral trading system. The same concept, it applies here, because if you are saying those countries that are ready should go ahead, you also do not have guarantee that those that are not yet ready will also, in a sense, catch up. In fact, you may have the implementation of the principle of variable geometry in a specific area, let's say transport, and therefore meaning a subset of countries may advance and then create new regulations, open up markets in that particular area of transport. Let's assume, for example, just for the sake of an example here, that Kenya and Tanzania decide that they want to go ahead and enhance their regulations and market access in the area of transport. They will do in a particular fashion that favors their economic conditions. That does not stop Burundi as well as Rwanda to also decide to create regulations in the area of transport under the principle of variable geometry, but different in how they implement the measures that is relative to what Tanzania as well as Kenya would have done. So what are you doing? In this particular context, you are creating conflict of laws within the same treaty. So it has that particular effect. But I understand at the same time, and of course we cannot be naive about this, I understand that when certain countries are not ready to move ahead, those that are willing to go ahead, I mean, they don't also want to be held at ransom. So we can look at this issue of variable geometry from two different angles. And both of the outcomes from these angles, it has implications on the integration process. In fact, that's what I always tell my students, trade law students, to say, that is called disintegration through integration, because if countries within the same bloc adopt rules that are conflicting and the treaties allow them to do that, how then are you going to reconcile those? So it is very important for me to communicate that countries have to sit down and look at the wider implications of some of the decisions that are being made, of course, notwithstanding their rise to advance their economic interests. That's point number one that I wanted to say. How do we realign conflicting treaties? This is, according to me, a decision that individual countries will have to take. Let's take an example, and I hope those of us who are from Kenya will not mind if I make an example using Kenya. Kenya is a member of COMESA. It has taken certain commitments under COMESA, and at the same time, it has taken commitments under the EAC treaty. So if there is a conflict between commitments of Kenya under COMESA, as well as commitments of Kenya under the EAC treaty, what do? That means the only recourse you have in the first instance is that you'll have to take Kenya through a dispute settlement procedure under the EAC if one of the EAC state parties feels that it is being unduly aggrieved by Kenya not being able to meet its own obligations under the EAC treaty. So that is one option that you have. Of course, I would say the best, let's say, form of trying to resolve this is to have countries to talk it out, and you can see how then the COMESA countries can get together. I don't know whether you'll have a super big regional trade arrangement for, covering both COMESA and EAC, but the state consent as to what needs to happen will therefore be key in resolving that particular alignment. There is no magic bullet. There is no quick fix to this, because treaties are inherently independent of one another, except in cases where a treaty specifically says, for example, if the EAC treaty says we subsume ourselves as the EAC under the COMESA treaty. If there's no provision as such, it means you are basically in trouble. So again, that's an issue that I think in terms of alignment, we'll have to basically consider that. Another issue that Esther has raised, I do not know whether I'll be successful. There's something that I wanted to share, Esther. That is the strategy for the private sector. Of course, it seems like it's not coming, but it's fine. There's something that I wanted to share, which is that we have seen how even the advanced countries get the private sector to be involved in the trade-related initiatives, such as the AfCFTA. And I believe we can borrow from what they're doing and then try to implement, at least in a way that is conducive to our environment, some of the good things that they are doing. And you can go to, for example, to the US, you can go to Asia, even cities organize the private sector in a way that is able to see how can they benefit from the various provisions that you have in trade agreements. But specific to trade and services, I'll mention this and I'll reflect this experience to you. When we negotiated the LDC services waiver at the World Trade Organization, in my former life, being a negotiator there, what we did, of course, this was a resource-intensive activity. We had to go to the European Union at the time and ask for some funding, and I think we had about 900,000 euros to carry out an assessment of the interest of the LDCs, such that when we then, as the LDC countries, table a request for a services waiver, it is also being accompanied by specific sectors as well as subsectors' interests that are quite clear and specific. So we carried out that work, and research was carried out and private sector was leading the process. And then again, we were able to identify markets where the private sector is saying, if, for example, the hair, the hairstylists are interested in going into the Kenyan market, they will clearly describe as to what are the restrictions in the Kenyan market across all the modes of supply. So I think we need to go into that dimension. And I know my colleagues have said that we do not have the capacity to do these things, but I think there is a way to do it in a manner that can still add value to the process. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Okay, another panelist who would like to react to some of the questions which have been raised by participants.
Yes, Adrian, may I come in now?
Karibu, welcome.
Thank you, Asante. Let me take one or two questions and respond to them. The one question that came out was how to reconcile liberalization in services in one side and regulatory framework fails to oversee such liberalization on the other. Perhaps I didn't mention when I was doing my submission or as a panelist when I discussed earlier. Maybe I outlined only the schedules of specific commitments that we are undertaking as a liberalization process. But at the AfCFTA, this liberalization process is taking a two method, which one is definitely, like we said, it is the schedule of specific commitment, which is a tabular format where each state parties will indicate the level of liberalization at the national level, and then we'll develop a regulatory framework to all sectors. Actually, now we are talking about only the priority sectors 5, but we will continue to have negotiation on the remaining 6 or 7 other sectors with their own subsectors. So there will be a regulatory framework to be developed, and which is not a new thing. The regional economic communities, they have gone through it already. Maybe EAC has for sure, they have gone through it. But another regional economic community such as ECOWAS, they are a very good example in this regard. And SADC, ECOWAS, COMESA, they have done it, developing a regulatory framework. What do we do with regulatory framework would be like when you have liberalization shown in the schedule of specific commitments, sometimes you would like to go there and provide those services in those markets, but sometimes then you'll find that the regulators, they have so much cumbersome requirements. Some of them may be not necessary. There are so many things to see in detail in the regulatory bodies or for the service providers to fulfill. So what we do with the regulatory framework would be to develop a common understanding, just like I said earlier on the common understanding for the business persons. We will develop a common understanding how regulators should behave when service providers are in the market. So at this stage, we have the elements paper. It's just a common understanding for all regulatory frameworks across the board, a common understanding on some principles and regulatory terms, which is already approved. So they will be highlighted or they will be reflected in the upcoming regulatory frameworks. That is one. I think the payment system is also mentioned, or in the financial sector. Interestingly, we have the partnership of AfrEximbank, which is based in Cairo, Egypt, we have developed a Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS. And interestingly, it was launched, I think, a month ago or something like that, and which is typically intended to resolve the exchange variabilities, the different types of currencies that we see in the continent. So this payment and settlement system perhaps would solve that problem. At the end of the day, the plan is like each and every state party will trade, or even any trader will be able to pay in their own currency, but the settlement will be done through this the AfrEximbank, so on and so forth. And actually, we have developed, again with assistance with the AfrEximbank, we have developed the regulatory aspect of this system. So hopefully, we will see a very good activity and picking up that the traders, service providers, or all those interested in it will be involved, and we'll see some success in that. Just to, I don't have much to say. I think Macron said a very good point when it comes to how to strategize for the private sector in EAC. One element I would like to mention with, again, with our development partners, particularly with UNECA, we developed a national strategy paper for state parties to use it. There is a very useful information in it, how to organize and coordinate their negotiation style, and actually then at the end of the day benefit out of the AfCFTA, how to coordinate themselves and strategize. And one element in that strategy is how the private sector should be part of this negotiation process. So the first thing I could say to the private sector is to get organized. To get organized, maybe at sectoral level, or even sometimes at subsector level, and you know, then to have your own due diligence in your sector. You identify markets, and then of course you have to inform your negotiators on your interest on the offensive and the defensive system, the defensive interest. Interestingly, again, the way the negotiation is taking place is request and offer approach, which by now I think you all know. So when your negotiators or EAC is going out for negotiation, you as a business people, once you inform them, then they would be able to make those requests in the market that you have interest in. And when there is also a request from the other side, you would have to indicate to your negotiators where your worries are. Perhaps then, of course, if you have concern in the liberalization of some sectors, perhaps it would be good to, in advance, to look into the, you know, the way how to reduce the negative impact of the liberalization, or maybe if you need reform, informing the respective government offices how to reform that sector would be key. But getting organized is always the good starting point, because that is where you can have full information about your own industries, and also be able to assist the negotiators how they should go about it, and then secure, or at least put your interest in the markets. For example, if you have interest in Nigerian market, then the negotiator should be able to request the Nigerian negotiators on those specific sectors or subsectors for more liberalization, so on and so forth. So I think just in nutshell, that's what I can say. Maybe if there is more, I would be happy to undertake. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Million, for the clarification. Because of the time, I think we are supposed to end it here. But those questions which you have sent to our chat room, we'll make sure that some of our panelists will respond them, and then we will write directly to you. So I thank you very much. But now let invite our Executive Director, John Bosco, to make a closing remarks. But also after the remarks, please make sure that we take a group photo.
Yes, thank you very much, Adrian. Allow me to, first of all, thank our eminent panelists who have done justice to the topic of trading services. I really want to appreciate them, appreciate their time, appreciate their wisdom in terms of sparing time and share with us the insight and the process of the negotiation and where we are. So I want again to appreciate all our guests, including our funder, GIZ, and also our key partner, EAC Secretariat, for sharing their insight and experience in terms of trading service where we are, and also giving us the status quo in terms of where we are in terms of our offers regarding the priority service sector. I wanted to briefly highlight earlier that perhaps we need to continue to engage and work closely, especially with the CFTA Secretariat. Mr. Million, you've done a good work, and you've shared with us the experience. But there is a lot to dive deeper into, especially looking at the non-state parties, how they submit offer, what about the state parties, how do we reconcile them? So there's a lot to do, but important that I've picked that it's important we engage the private sector in the negotiation process. The private sector, all the sectors that have been well articulated, enumerated, need to organize themselves. I think it's a lot to EABC and our national focal point to ensure that this information we've gathered here has to trickle down to our members, understand the complex, the intricacies involved under the trading services. It is clear that we expected that we are perhaps behind other regions, but from the discussion, I think EAC is doing great work. The issues of variable geometry need to be discussed further, and the issues of reciprocity need to be discussed further. We need also to take into account the key principles. What about where we are as EAC? We are at the common market. Where are the CFTA? They are still under FTA. So how do we reconcile that? I think those are some of the discussion we need to carry forward in our engagement in order to look at various interests from the sectors we want to liberalize. I think Mr. Makong mentioned a very important thing that we need to take into account, how, given the evolving global trade, regional trade dynamics, with technological advancement, do we weave those realities, current development realities, in our negotiations? So we need to look into the modes of supply of services to take into account the current trade realities, including the advancement in technology, the e-commerce platforms that we are rolling out. Also realize that it is also important while we are negotiating trade. It is while we are negotiating trading services, it has to be done in tandem with trading goods. So there are those services that are infused into trading goods. How do you take care of those aspects? So I think really from my side, this is an eye opener. This is a good start. I want to thank you, Adrian and my team, Adrian and Patrick, who coordinated this exercise. And I want to thank all the participants. Generally, it has been a very exciting and interesting topic. And let's work together to deepen this engagement and deepen this discussion. I will engage the team, the panelists here, the professor, our trade advisor at the EAC, the CFTA Secretariat, our sister from UNDP, in terms of crafting a strategy that would guide the business community where we are in terms of those sectors that we need to commit in terms of trade and services. So with those few remarks, allow me to wish you a great evening. Have a great evening, and I want really to thank you very much. Asantini, asante sana.
Okay, thank you very much, CEO. In the interest of taking the photo, we request everyone to open the video so that we can take a group photo, please. Briefly open your video, then we can take photo. Patrick, are you ready?
Just a moment. One more time.
We can't hear you, Patrick.
One more time. Smile, please. You can smile. Yes.
Is it okay?
Yes, that one is very good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you very much. Yes, good evening to you all. Bye.
Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you and good evening.